one of the, I would say, pitfalls of seminary education is, well, maybe some of you heard this when you were talking about going to seminary. Like someone was, oh, you go to seminary to lose your faith, or go to seminary and turn into a heretic or what have you. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that when we begin learning about all the different things. So, for example, when you start learning in biblical studies that, you know, there's two creation accounts or whatever, and they were kind of put together by an editor. When you learn that Matthew and Luke were probably almost certainly based on Mark, that both of them were familiar with Mark and then used Mark as a source, you get you learn the terrible things that Martin Luther did to the Jews and the peasants and the Roman Catholics, the Pope, or said about them. It's really easy to get cynical and sad and angry when you see how, for example, the practices maybe of your home church maybe should be different based on what you've learned, or you can see how they're damaging or can really lead to hurt and oppression pastorally. So for example, when you find out that you read Job for real and you realize that probably the best response to suffering is to just shut up, but there's a leader guy who insists on putting his arm around the woman who just lost her son and is like, God has a plan for your life, and you're like, like, no, don't say that. Even if you believe it's true, just don't say it. There comes a time and a place. Oh, you see how the church systematically preferences the wealthy over the poor, or through its structures isolates and others, LGBTQIA plus persons. There's just so many different ways that learning can get us to a place where we become very critical and very cynical and very angry about what we, probably in a lot of cases rightly perceive as injustices, and the church not living up to its calling. And theologically, this can lead to, and I'm speaking from personal experience here, it can lead to remaining in kind of a relentlessly critical, bitter mode of doing theology, where it becomes impossible to see redemption because we're so focused and so aware of the tragedy and the wrongness. And I bring this up because located critiques of Christology, which we just talked about, very quickly show you that Jesus can be used to hurt and oppress and isolate and alienate. And I'm sure that, so can Muhammad and so can Buddha and whomever. But in our experience, especially in at least what used to be a Christian culture, it's usually Jesus is the one who's being used to say to this woman, no, just stay there and let him keep hitting you. It's you're suffering for Christ. I think one of the big challenges of the seminary experience is to embrace that mode of critique, because I do think it's valuable and it's important for at least a time to be removed, take some academic distance, and look at the church and churches that you're familiar with, and recognize where there are anti-Christic influences, That's important. It's part of the job of reform, and it's part of the job of theology to critique previous iterations of doctrine and of practice that are not orthodox and they're not orthopraxy. That's part of the job. But if you get so caught up in that, it may become the only part of the job, and it may be, in effect, you may either become alienated from the church as a whole, which is possible, or you just may become just a force of tearing down and never building up. And one of the reasons I like to say that I'm a constructive theologian is because I want to be in the job of helping to build something out of the wreckage. The criticism of the last 3 centuries has decimated, and we've seen it in the course, it's decimated classical notions of Christology, of doctrine of God, and of everything. If you take HT 503 with me, you'll see the same sort of stuff going on with other aspects of theology. Criticism has had its way with the church. And what the church needs now are empathetic, incisive, insightful, faithful thinkers and doers to start putting new structures together, structures that are in keeping with the nature and character of the cross, in keeping with the nature and character of glory, in keeping with the nature and character of God. And so I just want to encourage you to recognize if you're too much in the deconstructive mode. Recognize if you're going down the road of bitterness, and if you are, stop, and it might be time to move to a different community of faith, someplace that is more in keeping with who you're becoming in faith. Or it might be that that you can carve out a place of reconstruction within a broken context. Because ultimately, if what we're doing when we do theology isn't leading to redemption, if it's not leading to fresh expressions of the eternal life of the Godhead in humanity, then we really just, quit. Just move on. There's make money instead. like there's plenty of places to go. Because what the church needs right now is people who are committed to that task, people who can recognize the abuses of the past and see where they're not supported by the scriptures and classical and contemporary doctrine, and who are willing to undergo the hard work of resetting and preparing the church to move faithfully and courageously and boldly into the 21st century.